Morning, sir.
Morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Akshay Kumar. No, just about to. Why? For a book on there, as such, is no book on the British East India Company, man. No, I mean, no well-known author. There are lots of books about the British East India Company. But R.C. Majumdar, uh, he has a chapter on the British East India Company.
From them landing in India.
Yeah.
How they converted from being traders into rulers.
Yes.
That's what I want.
That is there.
R.C. Majumdar.
Uh,
I have it.
yes, it's in the uh, topmost right Korata
Downstairs.
downstairs. Just check it out. And there are other books also. Just check out the titles. You might get in that. So shall we get going? I think we should get going.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. So let's get going. I told you that we'll just take a temporary break from political ideologies and return to Western political thought because we haven't completed Aristotle as yet, and therefore um, I I thought that since we have completed up to neoliberalism, and what follows is not connected either to liberalism uh, nor is it connected to, what should I say, to any form of liberalism or to the liberal philosophy, liberal ideas, whatever comes later in the form of uh, Habermas and Charles Taylor, the sources of the self. I really don't know why they are there. Okay, they're there, they're there. We deal with them. I don't think there's much we can do about that. But we'll get back to them after I finish Aristotle, because this is hanging in balance. And now that your dates of internal examination have been announced, I want to finish Aristotle in time to frame a question on Aristotle as well. Okay, I've been told that your model paper, which is for me a huge disappointment, Uh, I've been told that it is MCQs, and that means there is all randomness at work, but everybody wants things easy. Nobody wants, I believe we have a program where I have to set the question paper and give the answer key, and that program will correct the paper. So, why waste our time reading what you write, telling you this is not how to write or this is how to write? So, why waste your time? Why waste our time? Why have education? Anyway, right. So, we return to Western political thought. We had finished Plato. It's been a while, so it might take you a little time to, but I'm not going to try and jog your memory for the simple reason that if I start jogging your memory, then I'll start doing lots of Plato again before getting into Plato, into Aristotle, which is something that I do not want to do given the problem that we have uh, with uh, given the problem that we have with time. So let's start with Aristotle. Now, Aristotle, uh, now why did I put it here? He was a student of, he was a student of Plato in the academy. Please recall what I told you about the academy. It's not the name of Plato's school. It is in Greek, academy means a place where you study. So it is more or less synonymous with the English word school. Okay. So a place of learning. That's what it is. So it's not, it's a generic thing. It is not like Usmania University. So Plato's academy. No, it's not like that. He just called it the academy because that's where he imparted uh, knowledge and learning to his students. Uh, and I told you that Plato should be considered to be one of the first educationists, one of the first philosophers who emphasized on the necessity of a good and proper education. And you find him not just a theorist of education, the system of education that is there in the ideal republic, or it becomes the basis of the ideal republic, uh, is a theory, but he also practiced it. He was a teacher. Plato was an active teacher, and that is what makes him a truly great educationist. Okay, so and he was the first uh, to do this, to emphasize both on the necessity of education and also to emphasize on uh, the uh, providing of education. So, anyway, now, despite being okay, despite being Plato's student, he did not see eye to eye on Plato. Okay, please remember that when we talked about Plato, I told you that Plato believed, no, let me not put spaces. Plato believed in mathematically derived logic and rationality, and this is the influence of Pythagoras on him. Uh, Mathematically derived logic and rationality in order to uh, explain uh, society and life. That is what he did. And this mathematical, this form of logic is deductive reasoning. So Plato went around looking for solutions to various problems um, uh, by using the deductive method of reasoning, which I told you, the deductive method is something which is represented as an inverted triangle because you start with a generalized assumption or a supposition, okay, and then you go down to a particular thing. The best example of that I told you is the Pythagorean theorem, which says that in a right angle, that is a hypothesis, in a right angled triangle, the square on uh, the hypotenuse is equal to the square on the sum of the other two sides. So that's your hypothesis. Then you have data, and then you go into proving it. And after you prove it, you write quod erat demonstrandum, QED. Okay, quod erat demonstrandum. That doesn't mean quite easily done, which is what some people tell me it is. It's not. Quod erat demonstrandum is, here is the demonstration. So That is the kind of thing that is called deductive reasoning. And Plato used this in order to explain life, in order to explain society. So he was somebody who actually believed um, that the logic that is used in mathematics uh, in conjunction with the same kind of rationality will produce to us what should be the best form of society. Uh, so, this is where Aristotle differs with Plato. You see the problem with, and of course, he also differed on the issue uh, of innate knowledge. Plato said we are all born with innate knowledge, and innate knowledge is that you don't learn by looking at the world outside of you. The world of objects for him is the actual world, which is different from the perfect world, which is the real world. And so I told you, for him, the perfect horse is the idea of the horse. The perfect circle is the idea of the circle. So these are all, so for him, the ideal is the real. The world that is constituted by objects is an imperfect world, and that is the reason why it is always in a state of movement. And this he got from Parmenides. Parmenides uh, actually believed that I told you that very famous example where he differs with Heraclitus. Heraclitus says you can't step into the same river twice, which means the things are moving. And Heraclitus says there is no river, there's no stepping, all that is illusory. All that is illusory. Whatever is there in your mind. So this particular principle of Parmenides and also Zeno of Zeno, who was the student of uh, Parmenides, they all talked about this quite extensively. Okay, and this is one of the influences on uh, Plato, whose realm of forms, I'm mentioning this because this word will come again. When we do Aristotle, this word will come up again. Not the expression realm of forms, but the word form. And it won't come in plural as it is in the case of uh, Plato. It comes in the form of a singular. Anyway, so all these things uh, Aristotle disagreed with. Okay, Aristotle's view Um, there is hardly anything Aristotle did not have a view about. Okay, if you remember your school days, and frankly, I don't know how the school curriculum is right now, but when I was in school, practically in every subject, somewhere or the other, there would be a reference to Aristotle, be it physics, be it um civics, be it history. Everywhere Aristotle figured. Zoology, Aristotle figured. Botany, Aristotle figured. So Aristotle was a bit of an encyclopedia, which is probably an insult to him to say he was a bit of an encyclopedia. No, he was an encyclopedia. He gave deep thought. He gave absolutely very deep thought to things, and uh, he was also a teacher despite his not having a theory of education. Aristotle did not have a theory of education, but he was a teacher. Jeez, can't type teacher. Now, yet again, people think Lyceum is the name of the school that was, uh, Lyceum was the name of the school that Aristotle taught in, and he gave it the name Lyceum. False. The difference between the academy and Lyceum is academy is more of a traditional way of imparting education, where the teacher is in front of the students and everybody is seated, and people are basically uh, being told what is what. There is a possibility of dialogue. There is a possibility of dialogue. It was very much encouraged in the academy. But it was a traditional method, which is very different from the Lyceum. Lyceum is, like I said, not a proper noun. Lyceum means imparting peripatetic education. Now that again is a problem term, right? What is peripatetic? Peripatetic is teaching while walking. So we're talking about Aristotle, somebody who was a restless soul. He wouldn't sit at a place. He wouldn't sit at a place. He used to have animated discussions. He used to have animated discussions with his students, and I'll explain this to you later. But Habermas would have been very proud of Aristotle. In fact, he is in Theory and Practice, a book that he wrote, Habermas. He praises Aristotle to the skies. But I can't tell you that now because it involves the usage of a couple of terms uh, which you won't know the meaning of. And if I have to explain that, then I'll be going away from Aristotle. Uh, so that is a detour that I cannot afford to take right now. So the thing was that he was a restless soul. So I don't know if you might have noticed even in everyday life. I have seen uh, my nephew and my cousin. There are people, but they have to walk when they're talking on the phone. They can't sit and talk on the phone. They walk while they are talking on the phone, and they are animated just like that. It's not like there's some hugely controversial discussion happening. Even how is your mother? How is your father? Is everybody safe? That kind of conversation also requires walking. That's called peripatetics. Okay, the necessity to walk in order to think and explain. So that is an indication of a restlessness, not a bad thing at all. It's a good thing. It's a pretty good thing. Okay. Now, while he was walking, while he was teaching, while he was walking, he indulged in discussions. He indulged in discussions which were freewheeling. They were freewheeling. They were not constrained by any boundaries, including uh, including subject boundaries or disciplinary boundaries. They were not. They were not things that were like this. So, what exactly do we mean by freewheeling? Does anybody know where this expression came from? Hmm? It's actually a fascinating source, the expression, and it is used so much in academics. It's used so much in academics to describe a certain kind of having discussions. Freewheeling. Anyone who knows where it came from? Hmm? Akshay Pantulu, you're
I
the
don't know, sir.
hmm, you're the expert, no, in everything.
No, sir.
Hmm. Arey,
Not at
uh,
all.
I was counting on you to give me the answer. Right. So let me tell you the source of it. The source of it comes from the bicycle, the humble bicycle. Okay? By the bicycle, I mean your regular cycles. When the first bicycle was invented, and when pedaling had to be done, it had what was called a fixed wheel. Okay, as you know that all bicycles are driven by the rear wheel, because when you pedal, the pedal turns, and while it is turning, there is a chain on the sprocket in the front, and that goes to a sprocket on the rear wheel and comes back. So what happens is when you pedal, then the wheel keeps moving forward. So it's the rear wheel that drives the bicycle. And in its original form, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not very sure, Waterman was the name of the person who invented a bicycle which had a huge front tire and a small rear tire. Uh, and people sat something like 10 feet up in the air. That is how the original bicycle was. And then there were monocycles also, uh, which means there was only one wheel, you had to pedal and that would go. So, but let's not get too caught up in this bicycle thing. Now, the problem with fixed wheeling is that if you stop pedaling, it stops. The cycle stops. Okay? If you stop pedaling, it just stops the cycle. It won't move. Even if you're going down a slope, even if you're going down a slope, unless there is some, at least a little input from you on the pedal, it will not move. And you should know that in the Olympic sport of cycle racing, which they do on in a velodrome, you must have seen. I hope they show the Olympics from Tokyo. I was once a sportsman, though I don't look like one right now. I was a pretty good sportsman, and I love watching sports. And cycling is another of my passions. Unfortunately, my back doesn't let me permit that I can cycle anymore. I love watching cycling. And all those cycles that you see in the velodrome, uh, those are fixed wheeled cycles. They're completely fixed wheeled. You can get them in the market today because there are some wannabe Olympians who will never get anywhere near a velodrome, for leave alone getting into the uh, whole this thing of competing in the Olympics, but they have fixed wheeled cycles. Okay, uh, but the real cycle that you see in the world today, you hardly see any right now. But as recently as in historical terms, it's very recent. As recently as the 1960s, Hyderabad was the second highest, had the second highest number of cyclists. Highest was in Shanghai. The highest number of cyclists were in Shanghai. The second highest number of cyclists was in Hyderabad. In the world, in the world. Okay. Um so cycling was a very common thing. It's now, of course, you can't cycle with this kind of traffic unless you have dedicated lanes for cycling. You can't actually cycle unless you're cycling somewhere in a closed colony kind of a thing. And so there were a lot of cycles here, by the way. And it had the highest number of cycle rickshaws in the world. It had the highest number of cycle rickshaws in the world. Uh, so how does the regular cycles work? Put it on a stand, work the pedal once. The wheel turns and continues to turn till it runs out of momentum. Okay, the wheel turns and continues to turn without any more input. Without any more input. Why? Because that kind of a wheel is called a free wheel as opposed to a fixed wheel. So, what is a free wheel? You have a hub on the top of which you have the sprocket at the rear, and that sprocket basically turns the wheel. But even if you stop giving inputs, the hub gets detached from the sprocket and continues to move with a certain momentum. So if you're going down slope, you can go down slope without pedaling and you can go pretty fast. Just gravity will pull you down. So that's a free wheel. It's not attached to anything. Technically, that's what it is. So when people talk about freewheeling conversations, when they talk about freewheeling uh, discussions, what they are implying is that it's not one person who is giving inputs, many people are giving, and the wheel of conversation keeps turning. Now, primarily, Aristotle's way of discussing, a way of teaching was conversational. So I'll just put it as Aristotle believed in mm, conversational learning. That's what he believed in. Have a conversation and you'll learn. You know, What if you read a book, what will take you a month, sit with someone who knows things and talk with them, and you learn a lot in an hour, more than what you learn by reading a book for a month. Seriously, that's how I picked up a lot of information from various different subjects, because people would talk, I would listen, and being a listener made me learn a lot of things without having to even touch a book. But of course, you have to make sure that you're listening to the right people, not to the IT cell of the party in power that puts out spurious things, not those kind of things. So he believed in conversational learning, but conversation is not like how's the weather? Is it sunny? Is it bright? No, that's not the conversation. It was a discussion, or let's put it this way, a discursive conversation on various subjects that kept emerging while he was talking and his students were responding. Now, that is the true greatness of Aristotle. He heard his students out, and therefore, Aristotle thought he himself was enriched by the teaching process, because he was also listening to what his students were saying. I think I mentioned once or twice that we say William Harvey is the person who discovered the circulation of blood. But if you read Aristotle's student Theophrastus, 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 Theophrastus asks this question: if he cut himself and blood was flowing, so he asked himself this question: if blood flows, does it mean that blood is also flowing inside the body? Or is it that we just cut and the blood that is there in one place flows out? He said that is unlikely. That is unlikely. He said it must be that it's already flowing, and therefore with that momentum it continues to flow. So the earliest instance of blood circulating in the body were there in the questions raised by Theophrastus in his discussion with Aristotle. In his discussion with Aristotle. Okay. Uh, so Aristotle is credited with a number of books. Okay. Because we are students of political science, let's start with this. Politics, ethics, poetics, uh, okay. We can go on and on, but I put these books here for a. In fact, there are two books on ethics. Uh, has anyone ever heard of a comic strip called Asterix?
Yes, sir.
Have you read any of them?
Nope.
You haven't?
No, sir.
Ah, that's a crime, madam. Having heard of them and not reading is a crime. If you didn't hear about them and didn't read them, then that's pardonable. But having heard about them and not, uh, you know, okay, if you promise to return me those, I have the entire collection. They are incredibly funny and absolutely thorough in history. They are thorough in history. They weave a story around actual history, around actual history. But why am I talking about asterisks? What is have you heard of these words? Hmm? Have you heard of these words?
Obelisk means long tower-like thing, sir.
Just an tower is an obelisk. An obelisk is narrow at the top and gets broader as it comes down. That is an obelisk. Uh, George Washington, the simple man that he was, his memorial is just an obelisk. Unlike other memorials where you have people, the presidents, especially the Lincoln Memorial, you have Lincoln sitting like that. George Washington was a simple man, and so they only have an obelisk. Okay, so an obelisk is something which is narrow at the bottom and it becomes broader. Sorry, narrow at the top and broader at the bottom. Now, the writers of the comic strip, originally René Goscinny, these were written in French, by the way. Okay, so the English translations, I think, are better than the French ones. I have read it in French because I do know French, or I like to think I know French a bit, not too much. So they changed the names. Asterisk. Have you heard of an asterisk? An
Yes, sir. Star
correct. A star
symbol.
which will have something written at the bottom. It's a qualification. Okay. You say Aristotle was a great scholar, and you put an asterisk, and you say this is being said in so and so context. So that is an asterisk, and an asterisk became asterix. Okay, the name of the main character is asterix. Then you have obelix, who's a fat man like me. And he, I think, is the most interesting of all characters that they created in this comic strip. Don't read there are two other people who are doing it now. Continuing with the series, I bought those. They are bad. They are nowhere near like what Rene Goscinny and uh, Albert Uderzo created. Okay, they're nowhere near that. So every Gaul is France, and it is set in the year 50 BC, and everybody there is called, their name ends with X. So they have a chief whose name is Vital Statistics, and they have a druid who is Getafix. Okay, and they have various characters in various novels. Homeopathics, chief whose morals are elastics. Okay, so you have all these. Do you know where the inspiration came to name them with an X at the end? Come on, it's obvious. Just replace the CS there with an X. Didn't you get it? Politics, ethics, poetics, prior and posterior analytics, all these. That is the inspiration. The names of Aristotle's books were the inspiration of creating all Gaulish names with an X at the end. Asterix, because of this. Anyway, now let's come back to Aristotle. I think Madam Padma is angry. I was just joking, Madam, that if you haven't heard and if you've heard and
No,
not read,
sir.
yeah, please don't take me amiss, huh? Please.
No, sir, no.
Jesus, what is this?
No,
Wow.
sir, not at all. These were very old, no, sir.
They were very old.
Just long back published, so we didn't get
Yeah.
a hand on it to read.
Yeah. I have a
Yeah.
whole collection. You should read them. They're so incredibly funny, but at the same time, they're so informative as well.
Hmm.
They're very, very informative. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
let's get back to Aristotle. Aristotle did not Aristotle actually didn't write any of the books that are attributed to him. He didn't write at all. Plato, yes, he wrote. Aristotle didn't write. Aristotle believed in transmission of knowledge through word of mouth, through discussion, through all those things. He believed in that. And therefore, he didn't write. He would only talk. But he had a band of students. He had a band of students who realized that Aristotle is somebody who's saying profoundly wise things. So, what did they do? They divided themselves into groups, saying that if he's, let's take those books, if he's talking of politics, you people make mental notes. They didn't have pen and paper, so they couldn't make other kind of notes. So there's make mental notes. You make notes about ethics. Another group was tasked with poetics. It was like that. Students divided themselves into groups and they concentrated on one particular thing because his discussions were freewheeling. Okay, so they concentrated one group each on one subject, and every day at the end of the class, they would go back and document them. So all his books, Aristotle's books, were written by his students. They are Aristotle's ideas. But if you remember what I told you about Gadamer, Gadamer says that, you know, if you say something to someone and by the time that second person writes this down, that is already an interpretation. That's what he says. So one little problem that we have with Aristotle is how much of these are purely Aristotle and how many of these writings, what percentage in each of these writings, there is an interpretation of the students. Obviously, they can't remember verbatim the things that he said. So the idea they remembered, But while you put it in your words, it already has become an interpretation, which basically means that Aristotle's books are at least in some part interpreted by his students. They may or may not convey the intent of Aristotle as he wanted to convey them. Uh, Aristotle, as he wanted to convey the ideas. You will find this problem with politics. The book Politics is divided into books again. I think there are about 11 books that you find in Aristotle, Politics. And there is an inconsistency between book 6 and book 7, a complete inconsistency. Somehow, the book 7 contradicts a number of things that Aristotle says in book 6. Okay, so real scholars, Greek scholars like Ernest Barker, who in my opinion is the best of the lot, says that this is a problem of writing by two different students. We don't know which of them is right, which of them is wrong, because they are contradicting each other in places. And that is a bit of an inconvenience. That is a bit of an inconvenience because you don't get a properly flowing text. You don't get a flowing text. Read any of his books. You can read Ethics. Now, there are two books named Ethics, actually, not one book. Okay. The two books that Aristotle wrote or were written on his behalf. One is please add ethics at the end of Nicomachean. And the second one is Eudemian ethics. Now, Nicomachus was Aristotle's father, who was, I am told, or I'm not told, I read that he was a scholar in his own right, especially with things that pertained to ethics. He had very definitive views, and ethics in the Greek sense of the term, ethics in the Greek sense of the term is not different from morality. It's only in the modern period that we make a distinction between ethics and morality. But in the Greek term, the sense of the term, they
Sir,
are not. Yes, yes, Akshay.
Nicomachus was a son of Aristotle, sir.
No, he was a father. Where did you get this? Wikipedia? Hmm?
I heard somewhere, sir.
No, I'm sorry.
Now
This
I searched.
time, huh?
Now I searched. It is showing Aristotle's son.
No, no. He was a father. Where did you get it?
Now I found, sir,
Where?
in Google.
Where? Which site? Please tell me the site. Tell me the site. Hmm? No, no. That is a problem.
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia.
Yes,
This is not reliable, sir. I know what I'm talking about here.
okay, sir.
Nico, he might have named his son also as Nicomachus after his father. That was a common practice, even in the ancient, among the ancient Greeks. He might have, but just imagine how old he had to be if he had to teach his sons ethics. Nicomachus was his father. Search for the name of his father. Now that you search this out.
Sir, it is showing both father also and son's name also is the same.
As Nicomachus.
Yeah.
That's what I said. It's there in India where you name your son after your father. You name your son after your father. It was a very common thing till recently. The Chandra part of my name is supposed to be a salute to my grandfather, whose name was Ramachandra Rao. So my father added Satish Chandra. My father didn't ask anyone, didn't consult anyone about what he was going to name me. He just decided. It's a very funny thing how I got named. Just give me just 1 minute, I'll finish it off. At that time, the vice chairman of the UGC, was Professor Satish Chandra, who was later in JNU for some time. And he wrote a seminal book on medieval history of India. He wrote a seminal book, Professor Satish Chandra. When my father read his name, I don't know, like I told you yesterday, I really don't know where he got all his information from. He liked that name. So he decided to name me Satish Chandra. He didn't ask anybody, do you have an opinion? Nothing. He just named me. So yeah, Nicomachus is his father, not the son. The son could be called Nicomachus, but it is not his influence on Aristotle that made him write Nicomachean Ethics. It is the influence of his father, who was a scholar, like I said, in his own right. He was a scholar in his own right. And Akshay, are you satisfied now?
Yes, sir.
Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Both his son and father have same name.
yes, but Nicomachean Ethics comes from his father, who was also a scholar and taught uh, sporadically. He taught ethics sporadically to anyone who was interested in Stagira, not in Athens. In Stagira, he used to teach. So that is his father, Nicomachus. His influence is what you find in Nicomachean Ethics. And Eudemus, Eudemus, Eudemus was his student. Apparently, a very, very brilliant student. Now, there are different versions of this. One doesn't know which one of them is true. Even Barker is not very sure, despite being such an amazing scholar on Aristotle and Plato. Barker is not sure if Eudemus died young or what happened to him that he disappeared and didn't become another Greek luminary. Okay, so there is not too much information, reliable information about what happened to Eudemus. But Aristotle was apparently very, very influenced by the arguments on ethics that were made, arguments not in the Amartya Sen sense of the term, which is a bad word. When he says argumentative Indian, he's insulting the Indians. Argument is making a point. It's just making a point. So Eudemus had what is interpreted as the white Americans, as the American Indians, not Indian Americans. They apparently called their conversations powwow. Okay. And so the Americans created this thing that if we want to have a discussion about something, let's have a powwow. Some people say it came from the Eskimo language. I think all those are complete nonsense. I think it's just an American slang for a discussion. I'm sure it has nothing to do either with the American Indians or with the Eskimos. Okay. Anyway, so Eudemus had a very, very profound influence on Aristotle, and some of the positions in the Eudemian ethics don't contradict but are not consistent with what you find in the Nicomachean ethics. In the Nicomachean ethics, what you find are not consistent with Eudemian ethics. And since it was all about ethics, Aristotle was being extremely ethical and giving uh, whatever was due to Nicomachus, his father, and Eudemus, his student. Now, how many teachers do you know who will basically say, my student has taught me something? How many teachers do you know? Not even one. Not even one, I'm sure. So, so that is the story behind Nicomachean and Eudemian ethics. Okay, And when it comes to prior and posterior analytics, that is yet again a gray area, because some people believe that this is a book on logic, by the way. It also appears as some people say prior and posterior analytics is a subtext to logic. Aristotle also has a book against his name, which is simply called Logic. And people say that this is a subtext to that. It's not an independent work. Okay, so Aristotle, you therefore see that what exactly does he mean by prior analytics? Because he's not somebody who believes in a priori rationality, which is there in mathematics. Okay, you have, I hope you remember this. We talked about this. A priori, meaning prior to, and a posteriori, which means after something happens. Now, those who have a tendency to be, um, those who have a tendency to be mathematicians or draw their inspirations from mathematics and deductive reasoning, or who believe in assumptions and the belief that rationality can operate with assumptions, they use the a priori method. So Kant is a very fascinating example, but I don't want to go down that road because Kant says that the human mind is capable of both a priori and a posteriori. Okay. Uh, he calls what is a priori, he calls it intuit. This is a Kantian term, not an Aristotelian term. Intuit is the basis of intuition. What we know by intuition, the sixth sense, whatever that is. You say, I have a premonition that something is going to go terribly wrong. Or you say, I don't know, I keep getting this feeling that something is about to happen. That's intuit. Okay, and in Kant, it's not as simple as that. A posteriori is after something happens. And these two forms of reasoning have stumped even the utilitarians. When it comes to rule utilitarianism, then you have to believe that the rule is right. And there is no need for you to explore, uh, there's no need for you to explore the rightness or the wrongness of the rule. The rule is right, which is, if you say, let's take one example. Okay, more countries, people drive their vehicles on the right side of the road, right? So if that rule is right for utilitarians, rule utilitarians, as they call themselves, if that rule is right and that is a priori, and then you should not have countries driving on the left side of the road. But that is a rightful practice, maybe not in as many countries which have keep right or drive on the right side of the road, but they have their own rules and they are driving on the left side of the road. So that is rule utilitarianism, which is self-defeating. Because if you say that this is the correct thing, then how is it that somebody else is doing the opposite thing and not suffering any negative consequences? And not suffering any negative consequences. Act utilitarianism is a posteriori, which is you will judge the rightness or the wrongness of an act depending upon the results that it produces. Okay, if you have done something and you did not get a good result or the results that you anticipated. Let me say a simple example. You say, let's take vaccinations and we won't get COVID. And my friend's mother was perfectly healthy. She had no problems. She was given a vaccination, and in the next 12 hours, blood clots formed all over, and she died of coronary thrombosis purely because of the vaccine. So, do you judge the vaccine as prior, or do you judge it as posterior? If it is rule utilitarianism will tell you taking the vaccine is the right thing. If you go by act utilitarianism, if people are developing problems after taking the vaccination, then there is something wrong. Giving the vaccine, is it a good thing or not? You may say the incidence of people suffering negative side effects and dying of them constitutes less than 3% of all the people who have been vaccinated. But active utilitarianism will still say, should you do it? Because some people are dying. So if I go to take a vaccine, how do I know that I won't have these adverse reactions? So there is this problem of even posterior rationality, understanding things. So this particular book that he wrote, because of the fact that he eschews deductive reasoning, it has a little bit of tension in it when it comes to priori analytics and posteriori analytics, before and after. There are inconsistencies there. So Aristotle, please don't think, is somebody who's easy to understand. Even in the book Politics, he's not always easy to understand. Okay, he's not very easy to understand because, like I said, a lot of things that could have been written would possibly constitute interpretations. And the example of book 6 and 7, that is of the Poetics, that is a glaring example that obviously somebody misunderstood Aristotle, or if you go by the argument that somebody like Gadamer and even Jacques Derrida make when they talk about deconstructions and reconstructions, I've talked about those. Uh, if you look at Gadamer or if you look at Derrida, they say that don't expect consistency from an author. Don't expect him to be consistent all the time. Okay, and that is especially true. That is especially true when you actually look at musicians who write their lyrics. Okay, so let me explain this to you with an example. My favorite musician, Roger Waters, I have asked you to take a look at one of his videos. Is this the world that we really want? Is this the life that we really want? The title song of that particular record, I asked you to take a look at the video, which also gave subtitles of the lyrics. Now, Waters claims that it's a hopeful album. He claims that it is a hopeful album. And if you listen to the last part of it, he says that part of me died. That part of me died in 3 instances. And when he talks about those 3 instances, it is the pessimist in him. It is the pessimist in him that died, is what you're supposed to interpret that as. But look at the title track. I'll just recite some of the lyrics. Okay, the goose has gotten fat on caviar in fancy bars, subprime loans and broken homes. Is this the life, the holy grail? Fear drives the mills of modern man. Fear keeps us all in line. Fear of all those foreigners, fear of all their crimes. Is this the life we really want? It surely must be so, for we are a democracy, and what we all say goes. And then he goes on to say, and every time a student is run over by a tank, and every time a pirate's dog is forced to walk the plank, and every time a Russian bride is advertised for sale, and every time a journalist is left to rot in jail, and every time a little girl's life is casually spent, and every time somebody, no, a nincompoop, that is talking about Donald Trump, a nincompoop becomes a president, and every time somebody dies reaching for their keys, and every time the Greenland falls into the effing seas. So look at this. And at the end, he says, the curtain falls on some unforgotten life. It's normal. This whole lyric contradicts the end, especially the part where he is saying, it surely must be so, for this is a democracy, and what we all say goes. So there is pessimism there, which he says the pessimist is killed. Then why did he write this song? So authors are not always consistent in their beliefs, is the argument that Gadamer gives. And that is what he tells the exegete, the interpreter, that while doing exegesis or the hermeneutics, you should be alive to these two things. One is that it becomes an interpretation once it is told by someone else, and the other is that the author probably doesn't have a consistency of thought over a long period of time. Might not have a consistency of thought. Wordsworth was a supporter of the French Revolution. He egged on the French Revolution. And after the French Revolution happened, and after he saw the bloodbath that was taking place on the streets of Paris, he turned anti-French Revolution. He turned anti-French Revolution and was soundly castigated by his fellow poet Robert Browning for his abandoning the French Revolution. So you see, people aren't always consistent. When they write, they aren't always consistent. That is a distinct possibility. I'm not saying that it is always the case. No, but there is a distinct possibility of something triggering a change in the way in which you write. And that is what you have to keep in mind when you're reading Aristotle. First, there is interpretation because his students are writing his works. They are the ones who are writing his works. He's not written a single word, right? The second is, has he maintained consistency? We don't know, because somebody else again has written. We don't know if that inconsistency came from Aristotle himself or did it come from his interpreters and those who wrote. Interpreters as in those who thought they were writing his lessons down. Those who were writing his lessons down. So we have to be alive to both these possibilities. I'll stop here. It says 10:37. Tomorrow I'll pick up how Aristotle somehow managed to avoid. He also wrote a book called Physics. Okay, but it was actually physis. The English translation becomes physics. But he avoided mathematics. I think he was mathematicophobe. Okay, I don't think he liked mathematics. So you don't find him in mathematics anywhere, and you don't find mathematics in him. So that's why he probably didn't get along with Plato. And that's the reason why he probably said, uh, much as I love Plato, I love the truth even more. So let's stop here. And if you have any questions, you can ask me in the evening about what we've done. You can ask me in the evening if you have any questions about what I said. But please remember this intuit that you're seeing on the screen prior to is not an Aristotelian term, it's a Kantian term. Okay, that I want you to remember. Tomorrow we'll continue with Aristotle.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.